DennisMichaelLynch.com. That's DennisMichaelLynch.com. And I'm pleased to be joined at the microphone right now by Ben Sarro. He is a morning show host, like I am, only at a station in the Upper Valley, NTK. I always want to say TNK. I get Tennessee in my head. So, Ben, and we've got Jim Gaudet here. He's our Public Safety This Week anchor with on the Girard Large Radio Show, 6:40 in the morning on Tuesdays. Ben, the Donald, is he for real this time?
You know, it's funny. We were just saying a few minutes ago, not so sure. I think he might be for real this time. And one of the things that he jumped on was kind of a populist message. He didn't say that he got into this whole thing about we're owned by these other countries. They own our jobs. They own our land. That's a very populist message.
Well, the stories he was telling about,
he's going for real.
All of the the manufacturing plants that GM and others are either building in Mexico or taking deals that they had, say, in Tennessee and scooping them. Yeah, I just, Jim, what are your thoughts? I mean, I get the sense listening to Donald Trump, the initial thoughts going through my head were, I have no doubt that if this guy were in the Oval Office, he would be as ruthless with the rest of the world that hates us as he is with competition that he beats every day in business.
I like the points that he made about how we don't use our best and brightest. We use politicians, basically, which was, again, to Ben's point, it's a pretty populist sentiment, out with the old and, we have to have a new way of doing business. And I don't doubt that he is hooked up to some people, who would be very competent in certain jobs. But there are certain jobs that he also has to have kind of career people in on in terms of who you're going to staff at Secretary of Defense. I kind of joke, but I think we should sometimes, but I'm sure he's got some people that he can Donald can put some people in there, but get rid of the Secretary of State. We don't need to negotiate with these people.
That's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah, I think so. But and I wonder, Ben, because maybe you operate in a different part of the state than I do.
Sure.
You're up in the Upper Valley. I'm here in the Manchester region, and politically, I think New Hampshire as a state is far more diverse than people give it credit for. I like to say I'm in the stronghold of the only conservative area of the state left, which is the Manchester area, south down 93 toward Salem. And then there's your end of the world. Tell me, how does Trump play with his message in the Upper Valley?
Well, I think you got to take that two different sides, because that's part of the thing. When you're in the Upper Valley, you've got two sides. You have a very liberal side, then you have the more conservative side.
Is it conservative up there, or is it libertarian?
It's more libertarian. It's more libertarian. Yeah, it's more of a libertarian crowd. You do have a number of conservatives, but it's very right-left. So obviously with the people on the left, they hate him. They see him as everything's wrong. Anybody who makes a job is a bad person, is what they tell us. But on the right side, I think what we were just talking about, this idea of, well, he makes a lot of sense, but is he going to run? And is this just a ploy to sell books and sell TV shows? That's where it comes down to. I think nobody sees him as a serious candidate yet.
Right. Well, and that might change because, last time, he did this, people were thinking he was going to run, and then he announced that NBC gave him a contract he couldn't refuse for the renewal, as if he needed another $35 or $40 million. And speak of the devil, he's walking in for a press availability now.
Yeah, not exactly a profile in courage. I'm going to give up this contract so that I can do what's right for the country. I mean, let's be honest.
Wasn't there part of that, hey, you guys should be in good hands with Romney. He's a business guy. He gets it.
Yeah, and then he just hammered him.
Yeah, and then he just hammered him. Right. That's 4 years later.
He didn't just pull his pants. He just didn't spank him. He just pulled his pants down and spanked him. I mean, that was he choked. He choked.
Yeah.
But I guess what I wonder is, let's just assume that he takes the plunge and he goes in. Is the country at a point where the sort of tough, blunt, direct talk by Donald Trump, who I think everyone would agree, or at least has the perception of being a very successful, very savvy businessman, is the country going to look at that and say, it's time?
You have a number of people right now who are saying that Chris Christie's the right guy because he's blunt and to the point. You also have a group of people who say that what they like about Rand Paul is why maybe as a hair-trigger temper, he's telling the media off. And some people like that, so that might play for a lot of people, that blunt, just straight talk.
Jim, in your circles, what do you hear? You know, the people that you're with day to day. What do you think plays in Peoria?
I think business acumen. Certainly it's I hate to use a Clinton thing, but it's the economy. Stupid. It still is.
Okay.
And so that's probably one of Trump's fortes. I tend to gravitate to and like people who are I call incurable truth tellers. They say things that might be outrageous or might seem a little bit over the top, but they are, they're true. They need to be said. So telling the press off and saying what you want to do, I think plays well, to a lot of people. And I don't think that that's a populist thing. I think people are tired of being, fed party line and all this pablum about, we know better than you. So
now, one of the things that I try to pick up when I do events like this are themes. There were themes yesterday, and there seem to be different themes today. We've heard a lot about negotiations, and not just from Trump and Fiorina, the business people, but we heard Bobby Jindal talk about, how dumb these negotiations with Iran have been, among other things. If it's about the economy, and I agree it always is to some degree, then this helps a Fiorina, it helps a Trump. But if it's also about national security, do you think, do you think the business negotiator, the tough guy, the shark in the water, the Trump, or maybe the Fiorina, who probably is as skilled, but just not as whatever about it, do you think that gives them, the business people in the crowd, a leg up over the standard politician, I'll put it?
I think in theory, yes, but in practice, no. Something I've been very clear on my show about is I am of the opinion that we all say we don't want politicians, we're tired of politicians, but then as soon as we get that person who's reasonable, who, like you said, has got the acumen to go in, business acumen, or, Dr. Carson, we got a healthcare crisis. Here's a guy who can come in and say, this is what I can do for you. I got experience. We love to think about him, but then we walk in that booth and we go, that guy's got no experience. I'm not going to put him in charge of the country.
Yeah, but look what we just did for the last 2 terms.
But President Obama, to be fair, no matter what you think about his policies, he was a senator. No matter how he handled it, he had that
2 minutes.
Yeah, but he had that Senate thing under his. He had that Senate title, and I think it plays out with people. It gave him something to run on.
Look, I'm just going to say this and get in trouble and move on. But if he weren't black, he wouldn't have been elected. So
I've said the same thing, and you know what? We're about to repeat that. When you talk about that experience, we're about to repeat that because I hear people saying, "Well, it's time for a woman." We need to have a woman, not Carly Fiorina. She's not a woman. Hillary Clinton's a woman. That's what we need. We're about to repeat the same thing again.
Yeah.
Now, but interesting here, too, is in between businesswoman Carly Fiorina and businessman Donald Trump was Governor Bobby Jindal, who also talked about negotiations, since that seems to be a theme in general, but other things. What were your impressions of Jindal? Just keeping an eye on the clock because he'll be with us in about 15 minutes.
I got to interview him yesterday. I have to say that I like him. I think that speech he did, the response to, I think, a State of the Union, I think the media sank him as kind of cold and calculated. I don't think that's him at all. I find him very warm. And at this stage in the game, I think the personality is going to play very important. Likability, electability. This is more important right now than actual policy. I think he come up really strong, and I think a governor, I'm with the crowd that says people are starting to look at executive experience.
And I agree with you, Ben. I've always, and I may like some of the political leanings of people like some of these senators, like, some of the things that Cruz is saying, some of the things Senator Paul says, but I'm of the firm belief that you have to be an executive, so I'm going to lean towards a governor only because they've run a smaller microcosm at a state level. They get that kind of politics. That's a politician that has a like experience.
I would say one other thing about Jindal that's going to play very big here in New Hampshire, and I think we can all agree, whether we're in the Upper Valley, in the Dartmouth region, or we're down the southern part of the state, electricity and energy is playing a major role in politics in the state of New Hampshire. This is a guy who comes from a state with a strong energy track record, and he knows how to get energy into the pipeline. That's going to play big.
That's a huge point. And we're going to take a moment here to thank Alpine Environmental Inc. for their sponsorship of the show. Folks, I wish I could wave a magic wand fund and just be able to do things like this without having to pay the folks necessary, but we have to pay them, and that means we have to find sponsors. And Alpine Environmental, they're a sponsor on my regular radio show, and they care about a lot of things. Among them is the environment. Alpine Environmental has mold remediation, lead abatement as their two primary businesses. They do a great job with historic and period restoration or renovations. And if you just need run-of-the-mill garden variety, nothing special work done, they can handle that too. Learn more at alpineenvironmentalinc.com. That's alpineenvironmentalinc.com. And spend some time on the page where they showcase their 4 appearances on this old house to get a sense of these fine folks. It's family owned and operated right here in the Granite State. So, all right, back to what we need to do here. So, tell me, you've had a chance to interview presidentials like I have been. Who have you interviewed, and who has impressed you either favorably or negatively?
All right.
And who seemed kind of run-of-the-mill?
Yeah, I'll tell you, this was where it gets interesting. As far as run-of-the-mill, like I said, right now I'm really focused on the visuals and the audio, not necessarily policy-driven. I got to tell you, I listen to George Pataki, and I'm like run-of-the-mill, but if you really listen to what he says, to me, makes a lot of sense. Here's a guy who did a good job with New York, and he's also, I know he's been on the social issue thing, but you know what? Think about where I remember what New York was like when he came in. There was a big crime problem. Yes. He and Giuliani practically eliminated that. New York's not even in the top 20 states now for crime. And the other thing I think is important with Pataki, you go to Buffalo, New York, you go to Manhattan, and you go to Montauk Point, it's almost like 3 different worlds, much less all being in the same state. So he's one of the guys who kind of surprises me a bit, and I like him coming in. I don't know what his chances are because he's dull. To be honest with you, he's got to pick up the visuals.
Well, and then, though, if you take a guy like Pataki, and generally speaking, I think there is a divide in the party on a couple fronts. One of these is the social issues. And it seems to me that if Pataki becomes the nominee of the Republican Party, he's got to figure out a way to engage the base. McCain failed. McCain, to the degree that McCain energized the base, it was because there were a bunch of people like me voting for Sarah Palin. And I will admit it, because I think she's a bright lady, and I think she's got great political instincts, and I think basically she, she had some fight in her.
Sure.
She wasn't the establishment. And then, of course, we had the whole Mitt Romney disaster where he even managed to get 4 million fewer votes than John McCain.
People didn't vote. They stayed home.
Right, but if you get one of these Pataki Republicans who say, look, social issues are a distraction from the real issues, and he's the nominee, or someone like him is the nominee, how in God's name do you engage the base?
That's going to be that is an obvious challenge. And, it's kind of funny. A lot of people have always made that base argument on the primary. I would argue that getting to the primary is actually easier for Pataki. It's getting the votes now, motivating those Republicans to actually go to the polls and vote, like you were saying. It's going to be tough for him. I'll tell you who I have been most impressed with, though, on the visuals and the message. And this, a lot of people don't like when I say this, but it's Marco Rubio. His story, he tells his story with fire. He's got a lot going, and like I said, not policy, nothing about policy. Right. He just says the right things the right way.
And he's got a compelling story to tell, so people want to hear that.
I'll give you an example, and this is going to sound, I don't want to upset anybody, but Ted Cruz. I like Ted Cruz. I agree with almost everything Ted Cruz says, but he's a bit of a downer. He's got a great story, but he tells it from the standpoint of hellfire and brimstone. When I hear Rubio, almost the same story, he makes me feel, it's that feeling of, this is a special country. And that's what I have to say. At this time, policy aside, I think Rubio's the player.
Interesting. Well, no doubt he gave, we were saying this on the air last night, or maybe it was off the air. Someone asked me about what his speech, and I said, that was a convention speech.
Yeah.
And whoever pictured it that way did a great job, because it made him look the almighty presidential. You know what I mean? And I was impressed by what he had to say last night. Christie's presentation impressed me. I got to be perfectly, and I'm not saying this because he's a sponsor, but Dennis Michael Lynch.
I've had him. Man, he makes me want to go out and tackle somebody. I'm ready to go, man. He's like a football coach. Well, he is a football
he's
coach.
A football coach.
He comes on with me, and I got to tell you, the first time I had him on, at the end, I said, I feel like going running down the street. You got me motivated.
That's a locker room speech at halftime. Let's go and win one for the Gipper.
Yeah.
He's feeding you like raw meat, and you want to go out.
I think he's fantastic. The problem, though, is what I was saying a little while ago. Are people going to vote for a small businessman? Over a politician.
Right. Well, and then that brings Fiorina and Trump back into the picture, because they aren't small business people; they're very big business people. And what do you do to them if you're the Democrats? Do you try to make them? One of the best things ever would be for Donald Trump to self-finance.
Right. Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I'm reminded, I don't know if you remember Senator Jack Barnes from Raymond.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Senator Barnes, because one of his opponents years ago was criticizing him, accusing him of buying a state Senate seat. And Jack Barnes had a very simple response. He said, I didn't realize it was a crime to spend my own money.
That's right.
Yeah.
End of story. Done.
Yeah, done.
And you're not beholden to the interest.
Right, and to your point about economic people, I'll tell you, and this kind of circles back to like public safety or homeland security. One of the very, very critical things that people don't get is homeland security is very broad, but some of our biggest threats to homeland security are economic and financial.
Yeah.
And
sure.
So these people, well, no, but I don't think a lot of people out there get that.
No, they don't put China trade policy in the same category with economics, and it certainly is.
And it certainly is a
defense.
homeland security and a national defense issue. So, I think in that regard, some of these folks out there actually have an opportunity to make some headways if they sell the message that way as well, that it's that it is part of a homeland security thing. That, we need to negotiate better deals. We need to ensure our economic security, our viability, and not beholden. That $24 trillion debt message is all about homeland security.
Oh, it certainly is, and you're preaching to the choir when you talk about this, and especially the China aspect, the Middle East aspect. We're borrowing money from people who want death
hate us.
to us. It's beyond hate. Yeah. I hate people. I don't want to kill them.
Well, we interviewed Ambassador Bolton yesterday.
He's another good interview.
And he was asked a question about the UN and whether or not we should get rid of it, and he said no. It's too.
Sure.
Great quote from Jean Kirkpatrick about when she was asked that question, and she ultimately decided, nah, it's not worth the hassle, which I thought was a great answer. But he said, the way you change the UN is the way you change is to change the way you fund it.
Good idea.
He talked about, rather than it being a compulsory assessment, that countries get to voluntarily support those programs within the UN that they want to support, period, end of story. He said that would be like a tsunami moving through, and I think that's the kind of thinking that we need in a world where we, at least U.S. out of the UN, hey, I'm there.
I don't have a problem with it.
I would say, that's some pretty valuable real estate in New York, and we don't need the headache. Go send it to Geneva. Go away. We don't want you anymore.
Or send it to Brussels.
But
send it somewhere else.
Yeah,
I don't want to pay for it. I'm tired of paying for it.
So, and you know what? I'm going to do a thing here for the John Birch Society. The JBS has opposed calls for modern-day constitutional convention. Maybe we should talk about that later.
I've had them and Jim Rubens on. I think you did too, and it was, boy, I'll tell you what.
I had to shut Rubens down.
Is this a paid spot you're doing?
Yes.
Okay.
So, no, we'll have the conversation. Listen, no sponsor gets they don't get sheltered.
Because I have a funny story about the JBS.
Oh, good. Well, hey, Hal Shortliff was.
But this is not your grandfather's JBS.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. This was interesting.
But they're in any event, they're opposed to a convention of the states, which would cause the Constitution to be amended. They'd rather work with the Congress to amend the Constitution rather than send it through the states. Many view a con as a quick way to pass amendments they think will stop the big government juggernaut. The remedy so desperately needed, says the John Birch Society, to return our country to good government is to enforce the Constitution, not amendment. To learn more, visit JBS, that's John Birch Society, jbs.org/issues-pages/no-con-con. Don't spell con, just put the dash in. It's jbs.org/issues pages/no con, just put put dashes between all the words after the slashes. Do you have a story about the JBS?
Yeah, and let me say I've actually been very public. I actually agree with the JBS on this. You know, we all have this great idea that, we'll open up the Constitution, only our views will be heard. But, you know, Bernie Sanders, who's been on my show, he's for the con because he wants to see his ideas pushed there, too. So just think about that. As the Justice Scalia said, you don't know what's going to happen when you open this up, and that's a real important point. But just a funny thing about the JBS, now I cover all kinds of things like you do, and we cover things like gun control, taxes, who you're going to vote for, all these heavy-duty issues that people get very emotionally, vested in. I had a situation, Hartford, Vermont, which is right in the middle of the state, right off of 89. Mm-hmm. They were going to fluoridate the water. So I had somebody on, and I thought this was funny. There was a movie years ago in the 1960s called In Like Flynn. It was with James Coburn, and he plays a super spy like Bond. And he's got this beautiful cappuccino machine, and his handler says, and I played the clip, he says, that's a beautiful cappuccino machine. He says, it's not a cappuccino machine. He says, well, what is it? He says, it's a defluoridation device. And he says, well, why would you have a defluoridation device? He says, because it's how the commies are controlling our brains. So I played it like a joke, right? Somebody from the JBS sent me a letter about how I was the most horrible person. They thought I produced this. Oh. And it was a handwritten letter. You know that's a dedicated person when you get that in today's world, when you get the handwritten letter. And they were all over me. And I said, listen, I really don't care if I'm on a well. I don't care one way or the other. Yeah. But, it was amazing how, and I just want to get this in real quick. You got an interesting subject when the JBS is in agreement with the Vermont Workers' Party, who also complained.
Yeah, that's a little bit on either side of the spectrum.
Well, I will tell you that when fluoridation came, the question came to Manchester. I was the only alderman on the board to vote against fluoridating.
Yeah, actually, after it all went down, I know we'll move on, but after it all went down, I was kind of on the side that said maybe we shouldn't be doing this voluntarily or arbitrarily, because you can't control this drug that's going into the water. So I kind of actually came around to their view. I just thought it was funny.
Governor Jindal is on his way. We just got word from his campaign. Does one of the reputations that he has, at least in political circles, he's a policy wonk.
Yes.
One of these scary smart guys who understands all of the issues, the ins and outs. How does that play today in a political environment where people want something fixed? Do they just want someone like, I don't know, Trump, that might be short on some of the details, but they believe he's going to get in there and fix it, or do they want someone like Jindal who is going to who here's the plan?
I think a little bit of both. You have to meld the two, and I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but you have to have somebody who can meld the both. And we have. But here's the thing that I'll tell you about him. He's not as wonky as some in the media would make him out to be. I did not find him that way. I found him very